The move the pawn to c4 by white is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the pawn to e4, claiming key space in the center, paving the way for the pawn to c5, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the knight to f3 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the pawn to e6 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the pawn to d4 with highly aggressive threats. Continuing with the pawn on the c-file takes on d4, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. Black responds symmetrically with maintaining the dynamic balance, a solid and accurate move. White develops the knight to a standard developing move that keeps the position equal. Black mirrors white's development with solidifying equality and continuing development. White signals fianchetto intentions, aiming for hypermodern central control. This maintains the dynamic balance. Black mirrors this fianchetto plan with aiming for hypermodern central control. The dynamic balance persists. White develops the bishop to activating the fianchettoed piece and maintaining the balance. Black develops the bishop to matching white's fianchetto and keeping the position equal. White's prepares for pawn structure development, a solid move that preserves the equal status. The move the pawn to f5 by black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the pawn to d6, claiming key space in the center, paving the way for the pawn to d3, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the bishop to e6 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the knight to f3 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the knight on the g-file to e7 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the rook to b1, guaranteeing long-term space control. White develops the knight to a flexible move that maintains white's slight advantage. The move the pawn to e4 by black is a mistake. A superior alternative was the knight to f6, maneuvering the knight to an aggressive outpost, paving the way for the pawn to d4, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the pawn to d6 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the pawn to b3 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking short castles with highly aggressive threats. This allows the bishop to b2, guaranteeing long-term space control. The move the pawn to d3 by white is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the pawn to d4, claiming key space in the center, paving the way for the knight to f6, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the pawn to h4 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the knight to b4 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the knight to f4 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the pawn to c6, guaranteeing long-term space control. Black recaptures with a solid move that maintains white's clear advantage. White recaptures with solidifying the queen's central presence and maintaining the clear advantage. Black develops the knight to a solid move that doesn't resolve the positional disadvantage. The move the pawn to b3 by white is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was short castles, claiming key space in the center, paving the way for the knight to e5, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the queen to c2 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the pawn to c6 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the pawn to b3 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the queen to e7, guaranteeing long-term space control. The move the pawn to d6 by black is a mistake. A superior alternative was the queen to e7, centralizing the queen to dominate the coordinates, paving the way for short castles, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the knight to e5 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the queen to c2 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the pawn to c6 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the bishop to b2, guaranteeing long-term space control. White castles kingside, a solidifying move that maintains the clear advantage. Black castles kingside, matching white's move and maintaining the current state of play. White develops the bishop to, a strong move aiming to control key diagonals. Black pushes, a solid move that attempts to gain queenside space. White centralizes the rook on the d-file, a solid positional move. Black's is a solid move, activating the knight and maintaining the status quo. White centralizes the queen to, a solid strategic maneuver. Black moves the queen to, a solid defensive positioning. White's is a strong centralizing move, increasing white's dominance. Black's is a solid but risky pawn push, expanding on the kingside. White's is a powerful centralizing move, dominating key squares. Black trades knights with, a solid capture that maintains white's advantage. White recaptures with, maintaining the strong central knight presence. Black's is a solid attempt to regroup and challenge white's initiative. White forces a trade with, simplifying the position but increasing the advantage. Black recaptures with, maintaining queenside pressure but accepting the disadvantage. White's is a solid pawn push, controlling central squares and increasing pressure. The move the pawn to a4 by black is a severe blunder. A superior alternative was the pawn on the d-file takes on c5, instantly capturing the target to simplify the board. Afterwards, the bishop takes on c5 executes a favorable trade, which enables the rook to e8 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly. This is reinforced by the bishop to d5 with check, gaining a vital tempo with check, unlocking the king to h8 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the queen to c1, guaranteeing long-term space control. White captures with, exploiting the pawn structure weakness and maintaining dominance. The move the rook to d8 by black is a severe blunder. A superior alternative was the pawn on the c-file takes on d6, instantly capturing the target to simplify the board. Afterwards, the bishop takes on d6 executes a favorable trade, which enables the rook to f7 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the queen to b4 secures an overwhelming positional advantage. Afterwards, the pawn on the f-file takes on b3 executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the pawn on the f-file takes on b3, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. White delivers a strong check with, forcing black's pieces back and solidifying the advantage. The move the bishop to e6 by black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the king to h8, claiming key space in the center. Afterwards, the pawn on the d-file takes on c7 executes a favorable trade, which enables the rook to d7 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the queen to c1 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the pawn to h6 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the bishop to g2, guaranteeing long-term space control. White repositions the bishop to, solidifying control and maintaining the decisive advantage. The move the queen to f7 by black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the queen to g6, centralizing the queen to dominate the coordinates. Afterwards, the bishop takes on g7, executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the rook takes on d6, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. This leads to the bishop takes on e6 with check, liquidating material and gaining active play. Afterwards, the queen takes on e6, executes a favorable trade. This allows the queen to b2, guaranteeing long-term space control. White exchanges pieces with, simplifying into a winning endgame. Black recaptures with, accepting the simplified but losing position. The move the bishop takes on g7 by white is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the pawn to e4, claiming key space in the center. Afterwards, the bishop takes on b2, executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the queen takes on b2, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. This leads to the rook takes on d6, liquidating material and gaining active play. Afterwards, the rook takes on d6, executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the queen takes on d6, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. The move the king takes on g7 by black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the rook takes on d6, instantly capturing the target to simplify the board, paving the way for the queen to b2, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the pawn to f4 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly. This leads to the rook takes on d6, liquidating material and gaining active play. Afterwards, the pawn on the c-file takes on d6, executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the pawn on the e-file takes on f4, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. White delivers a check with, solidifying the king's position and maintaining the advantage. Black's is a solid but forced move to escape immediate threats. White's captures a pawn, a solid move consolidating the decisive advantage. Black's is a solid move, defending the back rank. The move the pawn to b4 by white is a mistake. A superior alternative was the rook to d4, activating the rook on an open file, paving the way for the rook to a6, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the rook on the f-file to d1 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the rook to c6 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the queen to b4 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the rook to b6, guaranteeing long-term space control.